Well, welcome to the Sunday night review. How's your weekend been? I bet it's been eventful. It certainly has been for me. And if you're watching the replay, thanks very much for joining us on the Sunday night review. Well, I thought I'd give a little bit of an overview of some of the stuff that's been happening here at the Pitchford household. And one little thing just for you to be aware of is that it's been a little bit different this Sunday. What do I normally do? Well, Sunday normally involves getting up, probably going to one of the services at our local church, maybe the 8:30 a.m. or if I want to sleep in, then maybe it's going to be the 10:30 and I get to relax for a little bit before coming home for lunch. But obviously, there's been a lot of change that's been happening because of the coronavirus. And so, what I thought I'd do today is just put a few of those thoughts down in a little bit of a video and just having a bit of a chat about it. You know, everybody's having to adapt at the moment, and even the local churches, and of course, businesses having to make lots of changes to kind of keep things running along. You can imagine that there's a wide variety of what people are facing right now. If I go back to what's happening at the local church, you can imagine that right across the country, whether it's sporting venues or churches, people are used to getting together on the weekend. And the church that we go to, Kruger Baptist Church, it's what you might call a medium-sized church. But like a lot of organizations, it's normally focused on people coming through the door, actually having people-to-people contact. And with the coronavirus and all of our new social distancing, that's not as easy. So for the Sunday morning service, like a lot of churches, there's been ideas put out there to do things differently. And the great thing is how quickly people have either embraced technology or a new way that they can actually get in touch with each other using online things. So some of the churches are using online services so that they can actually broadcast the whole service as though it was normal to the congregation in their home. And it's run by a small band of volunteers, and they've done an amazing job. Some of the smaller churches are breaking up into groups and meeting in online meeting rooms, kind of similar to the way they might run a Sunday group meeting. So they get on something like Zoom or Google Hangouts, or there's another one called Whereby, and basically just have an online meeting together. And something that our church did was that rather than trying to get everybody together, they created a room and basically recorded a lounge room service so that it felt like it was more in your home. And then we uploaded it to YouTube. And that was a way that everybody could connect. And it was really encouraging to see, I think it was between 300 and 400 views of that recording that actually went out there. So there's ideas and people are innovating, which is a good thing. Businesses are having to adapt. You probably have seen in the last little while that the supermarkets in particular have been bearing a lot of the brunt of it. You would have seen that the likes of Coles and Woolies in Australia, and it would be Tesco and Asda in the UK, have been dealing with the toilet roll saga that then led into the pasta saga. And suddenly we're going through the local supermarket now, and just about everywhere there is plastered pieces of paper saying 2 items or less, 1 item or less, and trying to bring us back to a little bit of sanity. And hopefully we all take some responsibility to do that well. Here in Australia, the supermarkets went on to something a little bit different. As businesses started to encourage people to work from home, what happened next is that people needed to set up a home office. And suddenly the dining room or the spare bedroom or moving things around so that you can actually get some kind of work normality had to happen. And there was a run on what we call Officeworks. And Officeworks is like a giant variety store that stocks everything from computer parts, tables, chairs, cables, all of the bits and pieces you'd need to run an office. And suddenly their shelves were going a little bit empty as well. Went into one this afternoon and it actually didn't look too bad. That was the good news. But no hand sanitizer, the most liquid gold on the planet, wasn't available. What happens next? Well, here in Australia, we have a hardware range of stores called Bunnings. And Bunnings will sell you everything from drainage to wood to electric tools and things. They started to have a run. Now, why? There were actually 2 reasons with this one. The first is that they had people deciding that if there's not going to be enough food on the shelves, then we better start growing those carrots and we better start planting them quickly. And so there was a run on all of the kind of green thumb material. And then there was a lot of husbands who'd been beaten around the neck for all the jobs they haven't done at home. And suddenly they were running in to fill their tool chest and get ideas because if I'm going to have time off work, I better get some of those odd jobs done. So that's some of the things that have been happening here. I wonder what's been happening at your place. Are you a steady as she goes kind of person? Were you the panic buyer? Or do you have no idea what's in the pantry right now? I did talk to somebody and asked them, what have you got at home? And there was just a blank stare. So I do get it. One of the things that I was doing today was check in with my mum and dad. Now, mum and dad are in their 70s. We live in Brisbane, Australia. They live in Te Awamutu, New Zealand. And when we caught up with them about a week ago, they were hoping that this was sticking in the big city. Mum and dad live in a town of probably about 10 or 11,000 people. And one of the things that they had not kind of been congregating with big supermarkets or anything, so they didn't really know what was going on. But when they went to the local supermarket, they suddenly realized the reality that, yes, even in a country town, people are doing a little bit of that panic buying. The good news is mum and dad are doing a-okay. So we're quite happy with that. But checking in with them, it really comes home when you care about your elderly, and particularly when you're separated by distance, like being in another country. And so we had a bit of a chat about all the different things. One of the things that really encouraged me is that mum and dad have some neighbours that had been checking in on them. One had texted them to see how they're going. Another one from up the driveway, because there's 4 or 5 homes in the same area, had knocked on their door just to see how they're going. One thing that was also close to home is that my brother lives in Sydney, and his son was actually over in Paris doing kind of an OE trip, and he had to get home and then trying to organise to get that plane back to Sydney. So it was trip to Paris, from Paris to London, and then trying to get a flight from London back to Sydney. And we're really pleased to hear that he got home. I think it was just last night. So that was good news. You know, this afternoon, we've seen that the government, like many governments around the world, is bending over backwards to do what they can to stimulate the economy, to look after the people that need money. But at the same time, nobody kind of had this in their back pocket ready to go. So I think we need to be understanding as they try to deal with all the competing priorities to try and keep things stabilised. And at the same time, while government does what it does, we also need to look at what part that we can play. So I'd really like to encourage you, spare a thought for your fellow man. Essentially, if we can be careful with our social distancing, if we can look out for our neighbours, then we're going to be bringing out the best. And you know, as well as I do, that at times like this, it can bring out the best and the worst in people. I'm just encouraging you to be one of the people that brings out the best. Now, tonight, the Prime Minister spoke about the fact that they've had to put more measures in place here in Australia after talking with the National Cabinet, which is made up of the various premiers and their medical officers, that they're finding that particularly they feel the young people have not been observing some of the social distancing because the clubs were full, the beaches were full, etc. So I guess at all levels of society, we've got to do what we can to look after the less vulnerable. Let's learn from that. So right now, look out for the best in each other, support the weak and the vulnerable. An example, as I shared, of how you can check in on your neighbours, lend a hand, a heart, or a kind word anytime you can. Stretch your toilet paper a little bit further and look to the future. Now, this is a little bit unusual, but I wanted to read you something. You probably look at me and say, he looks awfully familiar. And I used to have a guy that would call me Winston because he felt that I looked a little bit like Winston Churchill. Don't know where he got that idea from. Have a listen to the speech that Winston Churchill, in the middle of 1941, he goes to his old school and he finds that they're singing a song that they've added a verse all about Winston. And he's feeling, this isn't quite the right thing. And Winston says, almost a year has passed since I came down here at your headmaster's kind invitation in order to cheer myself and cheer the hearts of a few of my friends by singing some of our own songs. 10 months have passed and been seen as very terrible, catastrophic events in the world, ups and downs, misfortunes. But can anyone sitting here this afternoon, this October afternoon, not feel deeply thankful for what has happened in the time that has passed? And he goes on to say some very important words that we probably remember when he talks about never giving up. He says, I'm addressing myself to the school. Surely from this time on, never given, never given, never, 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 in nothing great or small, large or petty, never given except to convictions of honour and good sense. Never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. We stood all alone a year ago, and to many countries it seemed that it was over. But all this tradition of ours, our songs, our school history, this part of the history of this country were gone and finished. But today it is a different day. There is no flinching, no thought of giving in. And by what seemed almost a miracle to those outside, though we ourselves never doubted it, we now find ourselves in a position where I say that we can be sure that we have only to persevere to conquer. And he finished with this line, and he said that he got the permission of the headmaster to change it. He said, not lest we praise in darker days. And he said, instead we should sing, not lest we praise in sterner days. Do not let us speak of darker days. Let us speak rather of sterner days. These are not dark days. These are great days. The greatest days our country has ever lived. And you know what he's saying? Is that you and I have got a chance to make Australia and every country that is facing this triumph by the way we carry ourselves. I encourage us to carry ourselves well. And one last little thing, just as a bit of a thought, find calm and kindness. It's amazing the difference it makes when you're thinking of others. And I hope that you stay safe and do well. Thank you.